Be prepared. This is not the full moon you've been waiting for. This is the one that's been waiting for you. This pink full moon lands on April 1st, and for many of you, April 2nd. And out of all the dates it could fall on, it shows up right when people are least likely to take anything seriously. There's a very specific reason why this moment feels different, and more importantly, why what you do before it matters more than the moon itself. This is one of those rare points where you actually have a window to prepare properly, but only if you catch it early. Because this doesn't start on the night of the full moon. It's already started. This part right now, what most people are brushing off as just another quiet day, this is actually the most important window of all. Because this moon doesn't start when it becomes full, it starts building days before anyone notices. This is the moment where most people miss it completely, because nothing looks urgent yet. But this is exactly when you're supposed to prepare. Because there are specific rituals you should do before this moon arrives, and if you wait until it's already here, you've already missed the part that actually matters. There's something most people have been doing quietly for weeks now, and they don't even realize it. You've been having conversations in your head that never actually happen in real life. You replay things, you adjust your words, you imagine how it would go, and then you say nothing. And this is exactly where this moon starts pressing, because it doesn't need something dramatic from you. It doesn't need some big, life-changing move. It's much simpler than that, and that's why most people overlook it. You need to say something you've been editing, not everything, not something explosive, just one thing that is real, clear, and honest. It could be a clarification, something small that's been slightly off, or something you've been holding back because it felt easier to just leave it unsaid. The problem is, what stays unspoken doesn't disappear. It builds pressure in the background. It changes how you show up without you noticing. And the moment you say something you've been holding back, even in a simple way, something shifts immediately. Not outside first, inside. There's a kind of clarity that follows it, like something finally stops looping. Most people will skip this because it feels too simple to matter. But this is one of the exact points where things start moving differently, and it connects directly to the next step that almost nobody is willing to take. This trade is not about everything feeling equal or peaceful. It's about weighing things properly, seeing clearly what holds value and what doesn't anymore. You need to take a moment and you write down one thing you genuinely want. Not 10 things, not a list, just one. Something that actually matters to you. And then next to it, you write what you are willing to release for it. Not what sounds good, not what feels easy to say, something real. It could be a habit that's been quietly holding you in place, a dynamic you keep participating in even though you know it's not right, a version of yourself that feels familiar but doesn't fit anymore. And this is where most people stop, because they want the result, but they don't want to name the cost. Everyone wants something new, but very few are willing to make room for it. This isn't a deal you're making with anything outside of you. It's a decision you're making with yourself. A clear signal that you're serious enough to let something go, not just add something on top. There's a very specific type of moment that doesn't happen often, but when it does, you feel it instantly. It's not shocking, it's not chaotic, and it's not even surprising in the way people expect. It's something else entirely. It's when something happens, and instead of reacting to it, you catch yourself thinking, this feels familiar, not because you predicted it, but because it feels like it was always going to happen this way. That's the kind of energy this pink full moon carries. It's not about random events or sudden disruption. It's about things unfolding in a way that feels almost prearranged. Conversations land exactly how they were supposed to. Realizations hit at the exact moment they can no longer be ignored. Certain situations reach a point where they can't continue the way they have been, not because something forced them to stop, but because they've quietly reached their natural conclusion. And this is where the word biblical actually starts to make sense in a different way. Not as chaos, not as something dramatic or overwhelming, but as something inevitable. Because when something is truly aligned to happen, it doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel random. It unfolds with a kind of precision that makes you realize it was already in motion long before you noticed it. Some things don't happen suddenly. They arrive exactly when they can no longer be delayed. That's what this moon highlights. Not new paths appearing out of nowhere, but existing paths becoming undeniable. You start to see how certain things have been building quietly in the background, connecting in ways that didn't seem obvious at first. And now, all of it starts to come together in a way that feels almost too precise to ignore. This is why some people will feel a strange sense of calm during this time, even if things are shifting, because deep down, it doesn't feel wrong. It feels like something is finally clicking into place, and if you're still moving on autopilot when that happens, you're going to miss the part where you actually had a say in it. This is where most people get stuck without even realizing it. They go through every full moon doing the same things over and over again, expecting something to feel different, expecting some kind of shift, some kind of clarity, some kind of movement, and nothing really changes, not because the timing is wrong, not because the energy isn't there, but because they're approaching it the exact same way every single time. And this is the part nobody talks about. You cannot step into something new while moving in the exact same pattern. It doesn't matter how many rituals you do, how many things you write down, or how much you say you want something to change. If you're still operating on the same automatic loop, you're just repeating the same cycle with slightly different words. The problem isn't that nothing is happening. It's that you're moving the same way inside of it. This is why the most overlooked ritual before this pink full moon isn't about adding anything new. It's not about doing more. It's about interrupting what has become automatic. Because most people don't realize how much of their day is predictable. The same reactions, the same habits, the same ways of thinking, the same way they approach certain situations. It becomes so familiar that it feels normal, but it also keeps everything in place. And then they wonder why nothing shifts. This is where you do something different, not in a dramatic way, but in a conscious way. You catch yourself in a moment where you would normally respond automatically, and you don't. You pause. You choose differently. You step slightly outside of the pattern. It could be something small. The way you respond to someone, the way you handle a situation you usually avoid, the way you spend a moment that would normally pass without thought. But that small interruption matters more than anything else, because the moment you break autopilot, even slightly, you create space for something new to actually enter. You don't need a new path. You need to stop walking the same one unconsciously. And this is exactly what this moon responds to. Not repetition, not routine, but awareness. And now, it's time for today's comment of the day. Every dream is possible by taking the first step. Once you have decided to take it, the universe will help you. But first, you got to take the first step. A lot of people wait for the right moment, the right feeling, the right sign. But this reminds you that nothing really starts until you move. Clarity doesn't always come before action. Sometimes it comes because of it. And that idea that things begin to support you once you decide. It's less about magic and more about momentum. Once you step forward, everything starts organizing around that decision. But it only happens after that first move. Appreciate this reminder. There's a reason this specific full moon has always been tied to early spring, and it goes deeper than people usually think. On the surface, it's about the return of light, the return of growth, things starting to bloom again after months of stillness. But historically, this wasn't just seen as a seasonal shift. It was understood as something much more meaningful, because what makes the return of light powerful isn't the light itself. It's the period that came before it. For a long time, everything looks quiet. Nothing seems to be happening. Progress feels slow, sometimes even invisible. You're moving, but it doesn't feel like it's leading anywhere. And most people assume that means nothing is changing. But that's never been true. There are phases where things don't show themselves yet, where movement happens underneath the surface, where certain realizations are forming but haven't fully come into view. And then there comes a moment where it doesn't stay hidden anymore. This pink full moon sits exactly at that point. It carries that same pattern, a long stretch where things felt unclear, followed by a moment where something becomes obvious in a way you can't ignore. Not because it suddenly appeared, but because it's finally ready to be seen. Nothing truly appears out of nowhere. It reveals itself when you're finally able to recognize it. That's why this doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like a return. Like something that was already there is now coming back into focus with more clarity than before. And when you look at it through that lens, the idea of this being biblical starts to take on a different meaning. Because if you look at those moments closely, they rarely came out of chaos. They came after periods of silence, waiting, or uncertainty. And then, without noise or build-up, something shifted in a way that changed everything moving forward. Not dramatically, not all at once, but undeniably. This moon carries that same energy. It's not trying to push you into something new, it's bringing you back to something that already had direction, something that was already forming, something that was simply waiting for the right moment to become clear. And when that clarity arrives, it doesn't ask for your attention, it holds it. Because once you see something in that state, you don't need to convince yourself anymore. You don't need to analyze it over and over again. You just know. Clarity feels different when it's real. It doesn't need to be repeated to make sense. And that's what makes this moment different from everything that came before it. When people hear something described as biblical, they immediately imagine intensity. They expect disruption, something loud, something overwhelming, something that forces change in a way that's impossible to ignore. That's the image most people carry. But if you look closely, the most defining moments were rarely like that. They weren't always storms. They weren't always dramatic. In fact, some of the most important shifts happened in moments that were almost quiet, almost still, but carried a level of clarity that changed everything. And that's exactly what makes this pink full moon different. Because there's no chaos attached to it. There's no confusion, no emotional overload, no sense of things being out of control. Instead, what it brings is something much more direct. And for a lot of people, much more uncomfortable. It brings a clean, undeniable clarity. And clarity like that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. In fact, it's usually the opposite. The quieter it is, the harder it is to avoid. Chaos can be ignored. Clarity can't. That's the difference most people aren't prepared for. Because when things are chaotic, you can justify it. You can say it's temporary, that things are unclear, that you'll figure it out later. Chaos gives you room to delay. But when something becomes clear without confusion, without emotional noise, without anything distracting you from it. There's nothing left to hide behind. You see things exactly as they are. You understand what needs your attention without second-guessing it. And that's where the real power is, not in forcing change, but in removing everything that was preventing you from seeing clearly in the first place. This is why some people will feel this as a moment of relief, because things that once felt complicated suddenly feel simple. Decisions that once felt heavy suddenly feel obvious. It's like something unnecessary has been stripped away. At the same time, others will feel a kind of pressure, not because anything external is happening, but because they're now faced with something they can't ignore anymore. Clarity doesn't create pressure. It removes the excuses that made things feel easier to delay. And once you reach that point, there's a shift that happens naturally. You don't need motivation. You don't need to convince yourself. You don't need to search for the next step. You already know it. And that's what makes this full moon powerful in a way that most people don't expect. It doesn't overwhelm you with intensity. It gives you something much more precise than that. It gives you a clear view. Most people are looking in the wrong place when this kind of moment arrives. They expect something obvious, something big enough to immediately grab their attention, something that clearly signals that something important is happening. But this pink full moon doesn't work like that. It doesn't highlight the loudest thing in your life. It doesn't point you toward the most dramatic situation. Instead, it brings your attention to something much smaller, something you would normally overlook without thinking twice. And that's exactly why it matters, because there are certain moments that don't look important when they happen, but later on you realize they were the exact point where something started shifting. A short conversation that felt casual at the time, but stays in your mind longer than expected. A small decision you made quickly, without overthinking, that ends up leading somewhere specific. A moment where you almost did something differently, and then you catch yourself thinking about it again later. This is the kind of thing this moon highlights. Not the obvious turning points, but the subtle ones. What looked insignificant wasn't. And the reason this matters so much is because these small moments often carry more direction than the bigger ones. Big events tend to overwhelm you. They pull your focus in every direction, and it becomes harder to see what actually matters within them. But small moments are precise. They're clean. This is where everything starts to shift in a way that most people don't expect, because this pink full moon doesn't feel like a peak the way people usually describe it. It doesn't feel like the final moment where everything comes together and something is fully complete. It feels more like a setup, like something is being arranged, positioned, or aligned in a way that isn't fully obvious yet, but will make complete sense later. And this is the part that requires a different kind of awareness, because if you're only looking for immediate results, you're going to miss what's actually happening here. Because this isn't about instant outcomes, it's about groundwork. Things are being placed where they need to be. Certain realizations are arriving at the right time. Certain shifts are happening internally, so that when the next phase begins, you're already in position without having to force anything. What feels unclear now is often preparation, not confusion. That's the distinction most people don't make. They assume that if something isn't fully resolved yet, if something doesn't make complete sense, or if they don't see the full picture immediately, then nothing is happening. But in reality, this is where the most important part is taking place. Because when something is being built properly, you don't always see the final form right away. You see pieces, you see fragments, you see moments that don't fully connect yet, but they will. This is why this moon feels different. It's not closing a chapter in a dramatic way. It's setting the stage for what comes next in a way that feels quiet, but intentional. And if you're paying attention, you'll start to notice that certain things you're seeing now don't feel random. They feel like they're pointing forward, like they're part of something that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. The present moment doesn't always explain itself. It prepares you for what's coming. That's the energy here. And if you're still here, still watching, I truly appreciate you. That's how these shifts usually begin. Not with something loud, but with something that quietly stays with you. So as this pink full moon approaches, don't feel like you have to rush into anything or force something to happen. You don't need to get everything perfect, and you definitely don't need to overcomplicate it. Just pay attention to what's already becoming clear. Because when things are this precise, when something starts making sense without confusion, you're already further ahead than you realize. Whatever this moment is showing you, trust that it's coming at the right time. And if you move with it instead of against it, you might be surprised how naturally things start to fall into place.